Good afternoon. What you see under the camera lens right now are some of the tools and materials that you're going to be needing to gather together so you can do your two small color studies for your Kandinsky piece, your larger Kandinsky piece later on. Wassily Kandinsky was a Russian painter who painted some beautiful abstract as well as non-objective pieces long ago, around 1900, in Russia, the country of Russia. And so we'll take a look at those here at the end of this video, but right now I do want to show you how to get started. This piece could be finished, all the paint's dry. You see there's a combination of different drawing and painting tools on here. The black lines are acrylic paint. We use our brush, our watercolor brush for that. I see some oil pastels in here. I even see that I've used a little bit of watercolor marker on my watercolor paper and my brush using clean water to cause those colors to dissolve and move back. Remember that as long as the paper is dry, and I'm going to grab a nice red color here, as long as the paper is dry, you can apply watercolor marker, snap that cap so it doesn't dry out, control the amount of water in your brush, redissolve that color to create some beautiful color blends. The placement of the watercolor marker is very easy to manage because of course you have the point on the marker and placement with the point is super easy. So we've got lots and lots of different drawing and painting materials available to us. Let's get started. With acrylic paint, you really ought to wear an apron. It dries and forms a plastic. The plastic, when it dries, the polymer cannot wash out with water. So do be careful with this. Roll up your sleeves, wear an apron if you think it wise. When the paint comes out of the tube, it's very stiff, it's very thick. It's too thick. It needs to be made thinner with water. So I'm going to bring water from my clear water container over here. I'm putting my acrylic paint on my nice shiny palette. My palette is waterproof. You see me carefully mixing the water with the paint to loosen the paint up. Loosen means to make it thinner. My brush is very full of paint right now, and it may be too full. I might go over here to my paper towel and remove a little bit of the moisture and a little bit of the paint. I just don't think I need that much of it. But here I have quite a bit of thinned out acrylic paint. I can always grab a little more thicker paint, mix with it to cause it to be thicker. Now, because the brush has a point, we are still able to control the mark. So I like to make marks. Now that brush is pretty well loaded with paint, but even here you see it losing some of its paint. Sometimes I love the way the paint runs out of the brush and begins to reveal, you see it here, some of the white paper underneath. I like that. That's actually got a name. That's called scumbling. You don't have to like it, but it is natural to the process of painting. These shapes that I'm creating here, with thin and not so thin lines, look pretty organic, but in fact they don't have to represent a darn thing. Nothing from nature necessarily, nothing from the man-made world necessarily. Just have some fun and practice your painting skills. Notice that I always, as I always do, drag my brush to control the edges if I can. Grab a little more water if I need to, thin that paint down just a little bit more so it's not quite so thick. When this acrylic paint dries, again, it forms an insoluble, that means you can't dissolve it, an insoluble black surface, which is great because then I can go back and color over it with all kinds of other materials. Remembering too that I don't have to paint just on white paper. I can paint on paper that's already been colored. So this is looking pretty much like something you might find in nature. A little more water there. Maybe this is the sun glowing in the background. You notice that when the brush moves, it makes a line. The line is evidence of movement. I kind of like that. That's a very active surface. Let me see if I can use a thinner line right here, just with the tip of the brush. And maybe another little line right here. Careful not to drag my sleeve. And I think I'm just going to let that dry a little bit, and I'll come back when the black is dry and add more color to it. Remember, we have lots of choices. Now, here I have a piece of paper that I've already drawn on, and I'm going to paint on top of this. Instead of painting on white paper, I'll paint on top of this. Recall that oil pastels are very, very soft, and you don't have to press very hard. They also blend beautifully. So in using your oil pastels, take advantage of the fact that they blend. You can paint right over those. Here you see some metallic Sharpie marker. Here you see some Sharpie permanent marker, black. Behind there in the back, you see some watercolor technique using our watercolor markers, our Crayola markers. When you mix up different materials like this, different drawing and painting tools, we're using different media. Media is plural. It means more than one. So I have oil pastel, I have watercolor, I have Sharpie marker, and I'm still not done. I'm going to be adding some acrylic paint here in just a little bit. So this is definitely a mixed media piece, creating a lot of interest, a lot of depth to the surface. Now that that's done, let me come back on top. Now remember, it's all pretty dry right now. Add a little more water to my paint, my acrylic paint, and let's see, let's have fun. What if I do this and follow that line? And what if I do this? And what if I do this? I don't have to follow exactly what I've already done. I can just paint on top of it and let those colors from below show through. And what if I do this? And maybe I'll do this. So you see the strength of the black line is very dramatic. One of the first things that your eye locks into and notices, it helps to give structure to the entire surface. And of course, being dense and dark, it contrasts nicely with all the bright and somewhat transparent colors around it. Do that. Just use the tip of the brush there a little bit. And I'm done. Now, again, this is non-objective. There's no object in there that you recognize. The heart is somewhat symbolic, but not really an object, just a symbol. So this would be called non-objective art, not even abstract. In abstract art, you kind of recognize things. This is somewhat abstract. You kind of can imagine the sun and leaves, maybe berries, or the wind could be over here, I don't know. But definitely this is much more difficult to say, oh, I recognize something. I don't. That's just me having fun with lots of different materials, a mixed media piece on smaller sheets of watercolor paper. I require you to use brush technique with your acrylic paint. Remember, it must be thinned down, and you ought to be protecting yourself when you paint with acrylics because it's very difficult to wash from your clothes. Please use a palette. Please, when you're done with your brush, wash it very, very, very well, including rinsing it in the sink. And the palette, since it's disposable, you can simply throw it away. Do not let that paint get on your clothing. So here we have 2 color studies. And I'm ready to go on to my big final, my Kandinsky piece based on the paintings of Wassily Kandinsky. Now, you try.